Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Orchestrating Third-Party Risk, from static assessment to continuous governance intelligence. I'm Simon Whitburn. I'll be moderating today's session for Sustained GRC. Before I introduce the panel, I want to give the floor over to Dr. Ahmed Shawky. He's the CEO of Sustained GRC and a London Business School's own fellow, someone who's spent over 2 decades as a governance and assurance partner at PwC and EY, diagnosing exactly the failures we're here to discuss today. He co-founded Sustained GRC to close that gap. Ahmed is going to frame why this matters and why it matters now, the regulatory governance and convergence, the architectural problem underneath, and what orchestration actually means in practice. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Dr.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Simon. Thank you, Busaina, for the assistance today, and welcome everyone. And a particular thank you to our panelists, who between them carry decades of experience across sectors and regions. So before the experts really dive in, let me set the scene. Third-party risk, by definition, is the potential exposure an organization faces from relying on an outside party, a vendor, supplier, partner, or service provider, to deliver something it depends on. Third-party risk used to be procurement sign-off box. Check the ones, file, and forget them. It's now a board-level governance test, because the party changed it, not the definition. The dependency deepened. The attackers noticed the weakest link in your the link in your risk chain or your supply chain or your value chain. Regulators caught up and hold the board accountable for a vendor's failure as if it is the organization's own failure. Different regulators, different deadlines, from DORA, the UK regime, SAMA in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Central Bank of United Arab Emirates, to the EU AI Act, the list goes on. But if you strip the acronyms away, they are all asking the same thing. Do you know what your suppliers are doing right now? And can you prove it? Most organizations can't, for 3 main reasons. First, the data is scattered. Risk, compliance, procurement, and security each chase the same supplier separately, and none of them hold the whole picture. Second, it's out of date. The data is outdated. The questionnaire was true the day it was signed. Nobody knows if it's true now. Third, it is not evidenced. You can't trace it back to an evidence. The data you have can't be traced to its evidence. Information integrity is now the top business risk in 2026. So the answer isn't another framework or another committee. It's orchestration, a mindset shift, and an architectural change on the way we do business. Let me be more precise. Automation speeds up a task. Integration connects 2 systems. Data moves, but each side keeps its own version of the truth. So orchestration is about removing the fragmentation, the different versions. So one agentic platform, one data model. The supplier exists once across the different functions. They share signal, they share data, and hand work to each other with control. Not the same supplier assessed by multiple different teams on different timetables, producing different answers that they don't match. This really changed the question board asking today, shifting from are we compliant? Compliance is a snapshot, and a fragmentation survives a snapshot. The question now is, are we resilient? Because that one can't be answered from a questionnaire or a filing cabinet. It really stress test everything fragmentation hides underneath. So the same question we started with, just ask it from the top, from the board. Do you know, and can you prove it? That's what this panel takes on today. And it is the question your board is likely already asking. Back to you, Simon, and to our distinguished panelists.
Thank you, Doctor, for setting the scene there. That's great. So with that, I'll bring in the panel. I'll introduce each of you briefly, and then I'll ask you to add just one sentence if I've missed something that's relevant for today's conversation. So first up, we have Terry Downing, brings over 3 decades at the intersection of cyber and operational resilience, with board and advisory roles across financial services and critical infrastructure, and the kind of practitioner depth that comes from having actually run these programs under regulatory scrutiny. Anything to add, Terry? You're on mute.
Or technology school.
No, I know. It's lovely.
I think it's a polite way of saying that what I do is I help organizations discover the risks they thought somebody else was managing, and I translate that regulatory panic into practical resilience.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Then on to you, Emmanuel. So Emmanuel Pascal is a CIA, CFE, CRMA, anti-fraud professional, audit expert, and founder of Condor Strike, with a deep specialism in data analytics, greenwashing detection, and supply chain compliance. He has sat on sustainability and procurement side of this problem in a way most governance practitioners haven't. I'm sure there's lots to add to it, Emmanuel, but please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted just to add that I'm also an educator, and I see a lot of people in front of me, students, professionals, and I can see the reaction, and I can see the lacks and the issues we have to manage with them. So it gave me a good scope and a good survey on reaction of people.
Excellent.
Thank you, Simon.
Okay, thanks, Emmanuel. So let's get into the ribbon question that's going to sort of cut through the theme for today. So I'm going to ask you in order again. So Terry, then Emmanuel. So the question is about a question. So what is the one question about your supplier base that your board, audit committee, or stakeholders are now asking that most organizations' current programs genuinely cannot answer? So I'll kick off with you, Terry.
I think the simplicity of the question is, what is the risk that we have from using these suppliers? I think it's that simple. What exposure do we have that we've not identified before, because we've actually relied on contracts previously, and it used to be an old saying, you don't get fired for hiring IBM. Is that just saying that? Is that relative enough? With all the latest regulations that puts the onus of the ownership and the accountability directly on the board rather than some delegated individual.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Same question for you, Emmanuel.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I think, and I will go the same way than Terry, but I would say one thing is that I believe that today on boards and audit committees, they don't accept the sentence that says, we have not seen this coming. And the question is going to be, they don't accept mistakes now. And so the question will be, did you anticipate all the risk? Have you done everything? Because they don't accept now any issues now.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that no sort of continuous visibility, there's no sort of connection there, no evidence, and I think that's the topic that we'll be going through over the next 45 minutes. So thank you both for that. So Terry, I want to start with you, as you're running these programs inside regulated firms. So let's start with something that's most concrete version of the failure. So most programs still run on annual questionnaires. I think we touched on that. What goes wrong in the 11 months between assessments? And give us the specific failure that the point in time approach simply cannot catch.
Well, having been on both sides of the annual auditing process, the due diligence questionnaire, which I think is what you're alluding to, you're quite right in the fact that it's a point in time, and that's the biggest problem in it. It's good today, right? It's not good tomorrow, because most organisations have, especially when you get into multi-international global corporations, have thousands of changes every day, right? So and a lot of the problems come from change, right? And the problem is that is that because there isn't that communications level between what's going on a daily basis, right? We're just relying on that annual tick in the box exercise, which, to be quite honest, being on the other side of it, I was told by a very senior person in an organisation, just fill the form in as we did last year. So there was no due diligence internally. It was just, they accepted last year's form. So really, you can't trust that information anyway. How that manifests itself is all of a sudden, because you relied on that core supplier, is that when that core supplier goes down and you go, but they said we've got 5 nines of availability and uptime. Yeah, but that 5 nines doesn't mean that they don't have an 8-hour outage. And then especially in the financial services market, especially if you're talking about the UK, where you've got 2 to 4 hours, or where you're talking Europe, where you've got 2 hours, when you're talking about South Africa, when you've got 30 minutes, that reliance on the third party is now becoming a risk that boards can't accept. I mean, we all did it. Back in the 80s, we outsourced and we offshored and we turned around and said that there was businesses built around, that's not your core business. We'll do that for you. That has now been proved to be a risk. There's also the problem of just in time, where just in time actually is just too late. Right? The old mechanism of yes, we will always be there has to be proven, and all the regulations now state they have to be proved. We now need continuous monitoring of live events. We need continuous monitoring and information sharing and transparency that has never been required before. But now outsourcing doesn't mean that your hands off from it, that you're still accountable for that. You need to have as much information as the board of the company that you're outsourcing to. And that's not available today in a lot of circumstances.
Okay, so it sounds like the questionnaire model has a structural gap, right? There are definitely challenges with it, as you mentioned. You know, it's seen as very much a tick box exercise at that moment. The quality of the answers and the responses could be held in question. So continuous monitoring is the way forward and the way the organisations should be approaching it. And you'll probably see it on most of the vendors' decks. But what does continuous monitoring really mean in practice beyond buying additional risk feeds? And where do you see firms making mistakes on an alert for a control?
There's still reliance on contract, right? On contract wording, which causes problems with the fact moving from this contract reliance to actually having a contract that says you will share the information, and the transparency and the honesty that needs to be had with that is something that suppliers have been a bit reluctant in actually providing. We need to move to almost open book, right? As if you outsource, you still actually have to have that level of monitoring that you would have if you were doing it internally. You still need to have people in your company. I mean, one of the mitigations for a company failing or going bust is the fact that you have step-in rights. But how many companies actually have the capability to take over one of their suppliers? Right? How can you know how to operate if there isn't that information coming to you to say how they operate? So there needs to be a lot more transparency and honesty and the courage to actually deliver that.
Okay. And when the monitoring that we're talking about, the continuous monitoring produces a finding, what does the audit trail or the evidence trail look like when it's generally audit grade versus when it only looks like it?
Well, you're starting to look at the same as if it was going into your own security operations center. You're looking at the same level of detail in that. One of the things that, especially in the digital world, I mean, the difference between the old Victorian way of doing things to the digital way of doing things is now you can't segment and stovepipe things. You've got to break those silos to deliver it. So you've got to start getting that holistic view of all the information coming forward. So the evidence has to be in real time. It has to be that you actually have tested, that it's part of BAU testing, right? And that information is available. And even working with the regulators don't mind if you have a problem as long as you do one. You identify it, you write the lessons learned from it, you put a mitigation planning for the current system, and you put how you're going to fix it and what date you're going to get it fixed by. And I have heard that they've actually looked for commitment for budgets for fixing that. All that evidence, even if it's from a third party or an intergroup, another part of the organization that you're buying internally from, that evidence it needs to be visible, needs to be valid, right? And needs to be, how can I put it? It needs to be validated as evidence that you can actually put into a court of law.
Okay, gotcha. So when you, I think you've probably answered some of this, but when you call an evidence trail audit grade, what does that mean for the internal auditor or a regulator? What do they actually need to see?
Well, first of all, it's right. So if everything goes well, right? If everything's going well, the auditor just needs to see that the process is working. When it goes wrong, they need to see the evidence of that, the fact you've done your best effort, right? So you need to see that there has been the process there, that change control has been involved, that everybody's trained up on what they're supposed to do, that you actually have it as BA. But you also have to have the evidence of why it went wrong and how you handled that. So recording of the incident and crisis management situation, which we all do anyway, and then the lessons learned and the evidence. So they want to see things like, you've identified something, it's now got an owner, it's now in the risk register, you've got a mitigation plan in place, you have a date when you're going to fix it. All that written evidence, all that those logs and everything, that I've even ended up taking photographs of whiteboards and adding those to my secure SharePoint, where I've kept all my evidence in that. But you need to prove to the auditor that, one, you've done the best that you can to stop it from happening, and two, when it went wrong, that you did best practice to actually resolve it in a quick enough time, and that you're going to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
So what would you say is the one place when a regulator tests your evidence trail? Where does it usually break? Where does it usually break first?
Would it usually break? Well, I try not to. I would say it would be probably the making sure we've done everything right that we could possibly do beforehand, in having the preparation and the planning and the scenario work, the severe but plausible scenario work. Having done that, you can always poke a hole in. Well, didn't you think about that? No, I never did.
Right.
It's that open question. You don't know what you don't know, and that's
Okay.
that's what we'll pull up. But I mean, people shouldn't treat auditors as enemies. Auditors are friends, right? That's the way I look at. I try to look at it. I mean, a lot of people, they hate the auditor coming around. I try to work with them because they give me work to do. Not that I'm selfish, but at the end of the day, you've got to turn around and go, okay, hands up, totally honestly, I didn't think that was a problem. And
Okay.
I think that's it. I mean, response to something that's gone wrong, we're fairly much good these days at actually handling, especially if you've got a SOC or you've got an incident crisis management team set up correctly. We're used to handling that. We're used to getting through that. We're used to following the standards for evidence collection. And most of us now hopefully do lessons learned and the mitigation plans afterwards. It's the prior to that improving that we've actually done the best we can proportionately.
Great. Thanks for that, Terry. So as you described, the monitoring, the evidence, the standards assumes you can see the supplier in question. So I'm going to flip over to Emmanuel now. So I want to come to you on what happens when the regulatory obligation now reaches past the supplier that you can see. So for a firm that's struggling to map tier one today, what is the sort of first realistic move past it? What's the trap in trying to map everything all at once?
Simon, can I just come back on what was said before?
Sure.
For answering,
Absolutely.
yeah, because I want to say a few things. The first one is that I have been in 2 questionnaires. I've been filling the questionnaires, and I have found that sometimes people, they said, you do section 5. And I said, what? Who is doing section 4? It's my job. Yeah, but I do section 4, but you don't know about it. So sometimes questionnaires are going awry because people, it's just an exercise. So people, I don't really believe in questionnaires, and I really believe in continuous monitoring. And the second thing is that questionnaires, they are based on, it's true that it's static because it's annual. Sometimes you ask for a certificate or finance account and they are annual. And so, of course, you have questionnaires that are static, but maybe you can ask for quarterly accounts, for instance. And I remember I talked to a very large French company that we were talking about sustainability. And they said, why do we have to do it annual? I ask my team to report I will try to ask them to report on quarterly basis, because if it's annual, we can't react. So maybe there is something you can change in your questionnaire to be less static, and at the same time extend the scope of the information. And I'm going to talk about it after. That you should try to look for signs. And I wanted to also add something that happened to me one day, because I tried 10 years ago, maybe, in my food company, I tried to set up what we are describing. And there was, I made a check on a very large ice cream company in Spain, and I found the stock price, and the stock price went down very, like 50%. And I was like, wow, what is going to happen? And if they have issues, we're going to have shortages. And what happened? There was a large strike in Spain in this sector. And so all the companies were stuck and they were not producing ice cream. So this is kind of information you can include in your scope of information to get. And that's something that could be done with AI agents. Coming back on your questions on the map, in the tier one, I will come back. I think that it's very important to map your suppliers, tier one, tier two, and what is one of the great things to do is to break down. You really need to understand your product, understand your service. If there's something outsourced, it's not in the list we talk about, but I would talk a little bit about geopolitics and issues. I always use this example of Fukushima, because Fukushima, for a lot of people, is an earthquake, but for a lot of people, it's also a supply chain issue. One of the very most significant example of supply chain risk, because there was a small chip in all the cars, in all the automotive industry, that was used in most of the cars. But this chip most of the chips were built in the Fukushima area that was closed because of the earthquakes, not the earthquake, sorry, of the nuclear issue. And so in a lot of companies, people said, why are we stopped? Because we are missing this. So if you don't break down your parts, break down your equipment in your company, well, all the services, you won't know that something can go wrong. So I believe that you need to map by, maybe when you said T1, T2, it's because it's coming from a T1 or a T2 or T3, but it's in reality what you would need to look for is what is inside your semi parts, what is inside your parts that could go wrong, because that could change, that could cause shortages in your company. And so you need to identify this risk components by components. And also, I think one of the criteria to sort your tier one, tier two is, can you replace them? And do you have sourcing in place? And what, do you have one or two suppliers, or do you have 5 to 10 suppliers to check them? That could be a criteria. Sorry, I've been too long, Simon.
No, that's fine. And thanks for the comments on what Terry was discussing as well. Okay, so obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we've talking about firms that struggle with tier one, and now we're really looking at tier two, tier three, and beyond. So the first sort of move, how do they start understand what that sort of third and fourth and fifth tier look like? What sort of steps do you think they would need to take?
As I said, that you will have to break down the components to sort your different suppliers, the different tier, and also I think you can use criteria on you can also use benchmark to. I mean, not going too much into detail, but understand the sector and as we said, the issue with the information, as I said, can be annual, can be semi-annual, quarterly. But so you have to make do with available information, and benchmark would be a good way to to track what is happening to your suppliers, because if there are incidents in a competitor or someone close to one of your supplier, maybe you're going to see there's a risk arising, there's something going wrong. And so you need to set up as I said, find criteria to sort your suppliers, and also map them and do benchmark with identify the competitors or the companies or the sectors that you need to follow, and see if there's something going wrong in this area.
Okay, great. And that obviously that mapping challenge doesn't stop at the operational side. Dr. Ahmed has a.
I just want to quickly like also highlight here that technology now exists to help the companies get more visibility on their suppliers, mapping the different tiers and map their suppliers on tier one, from tier 1 to 2 and 3. So for example, we use AI now based on tier 1 suppliers to understand their tier 2 and 3, and we go deeper and get that visibility. I think also the other important area that Emmanuel also highlighted is the concentration risk. Concentrating on few suppliers in one region or in one, those suppliers might be subject to a specific single event or risk that could significantly impact your supply chain or your value chain. And we have seen that in, when geopolitical risks materialize in general in many events, not only one, but even there has been a number of recent events recently around us in the Middle East and in Europe. Terry seems like also to highlight something here. Terry?
Yeah, I mean, there's in the financial services world, there's a mandate that you actually have to map your supply chains down to what I had an organization that was turning around and going, we're only going to go 3 layers down. It's too difficult to go any further. And then the regulators started turning around and saying, you've actually got to go down to where the actual, whatever you're getting is supplied from. Right. And what Dr. Ahmed was saying there is they're looking for concentration risks. Right. We had a problem during COVID about everybody had to work from home, but the supply of laptops, there's very few manufacturers of laptops now, and the chips that go in the laptops are very few. It's only when you start getting down to that level. But how many of us have got contracts with our suppliers that allow us to actually turn around and say, you need to tell us this, or else we're not going to give you the business, because they may be the only supplier in town anyway themselves. One of the things that I had to, and I struggled, but I got it done in the end, was that, do you know how long it takes to get an alternative supplier on your books in a major organization? Right? If the one exists, right? So you've got a key supplier, you've decided you're going to have an alternative one. If you do it during the incident itself, because you've always thought that supplier will be there, right? You actually won't meet any of your requirements, because it can take 12 to 18 months to onboard a supplier. So we need to look at this holistically across the whole lot. We need to understand what our supply chains are, and where as Dr. Ahmed said, where that pinch point is of the concentration risk, because that's the only way we can actually protect our businesses.
So, sounds like there needs to be a complete mind shift in how we're mapping this, and the challenge seems like a big one, right? Certainly for organisations that have only been mapping their tier ones, and I can imagine it feels very daunting for them, because where do you start? How do you prioritise those suppliers? Which ones are the most critical ones, which they should know. But if they're the most critical ones, then how does that filter down to their suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers?
This is why you need to start having cooperations of organisations like yourself that actually already has that mapping done for that company. So you can actually start turning around and going, and I need a link to that company, because that company's I've done my black box mapping, and my black box mapping level has turned around and said, I am at risk because of that company, and already have had that work done. Right. Because they don't have, because most operational resilience risk organizations, they're very thin on the ground as far as manpower is concerned, and to actually do this automated there's a problem with doing it all the time. Right. The quarterly thing that Emmanuel was saying, I would hate to actually have that, because I'd never be doing anything else with over 1,500 key suppliers. I'd only be doing that. That's a job in itself. So we need the automation approach.
And automation is the only way you're actually going to be able to do it, is the sense that I'm getting. So we've talked about mapping challenges around operational, and there's potentially cyber exposure as well. But it now also includes sustainability, human rights, embedded carbon, which I suspect most leaders, especially in the audience, think as a separate teams problem, the ESG's teams problem. So back to you, Emmanuel. Why should a risk leader treat sustainability and human rights due diligence as the same governance problem as cyber and operational dependency, rather than a separate work stream?
Yeah, I think what is the issue here is that you should not forget that you could be excluded if we are talking about people who are filling questionnaires. So if your questionnaire is not full and filled, you can be excluded from bids as well. You could be banned. And also understand that these people they are also in a process themselves. They have to fill questionnaires. So if, for instance, you cannot say, for instance, give information about scope 3, the rate of suppliers giving information about scope 3 is going to go down, and maybe this company is not going to be able to fill a questionnaire somewhere. So it's a process. It's a chain reaction. It's domino effect. So these people, they need the information. At the same time, we need to pinpoint that this company, as you said before, we were considering cybersecurity. I helped an American company set up its cybersecurity questionnaire. So I know what it is, but there are also operations. As I said, you can have shortages and everything. But now sustainability is really important because for two main reasons. The first one was about reputation, because if you work with someone who has a bad reputation, for instance, for human rights, you can be affected. It's the domino effect. But now let's think about something that it's really present, especially with the heat wave in France and in Europe. If they did not anticipate climate risk like the lack of water, drought, there would be issues on the supply chain as well. So sustainability is not just only about nice things. It's going to be a reality. And that's something I highlight a lot of when I was in Singapore, is that this is a reality. It's not just compliance about sustainability. Is a reality for a lot of companies. So we always talk about the backlash on it, but now it's coming back with the reality.
Okay, so when all of this has to reach the audit committee, we talk about fourth party and potentially further exposure, sustainability, human rights, due diligence. So what does good reporting actually look like?
In fact, I was thinking that they are. You said drowning. They could be not drowning, and I think they need to learn to swim. And that could be a very interesting. I'm not really a short guy. I really think that you should demonstrate them with a matrix, with a system, and show them what can go wrong, instead of having pie charts and everything. And I think the audit committee should see you should select a few scenarios and show them maybe in a system, on a platform. That's what can happen. I was talking about chain reaction, but what is, there is a tiny issue in a supplier, then it can go to another supplier, and then it can go wrong in our own company. So they need to understand these different scenarios rather than looking at charts, because they're going to ask for the history. Maybe you don't have the history, so you're going to lose time. So it's better to demonstrate, to make show examples rather than do charting. And if you allow me, Simon, I want you to come back on the where we were discussing just before about the relation with suppliers, and I wanted to add something about the and Terry mentioned COVID. COVID changed a lot of relation with suppliers, because a lot of companies despised the supplier at the beginning of the COVID, and they let them die. And at the end, when the COVID started, COVID stopped, they could not find their suppliers. And when we audit the supplier risk, usually we try to look for a kind of collaboration. The relation with the supplier should be a collaboration, as you mentioned, and so that you have a relation with it, you share information, you are not on an aggressive way to do it, but at the same time, and I think this should be more developed, you should have the right to audit your supplier. That's also a way to do continuous. Just as a reminder, when I teach data analytics, I explain to people there are different forms of different sources of data, and one is external data, one is suppliers data. And suppliers data, to get to get them, you need to negotiate it in the contract. Otherwise, you cannot have access. So it needs to be part of your process of negotiating so that you have a hand in the supplier. And so you can monitor what they are doing. And if you see that something go wrong, you can ask to audit them and check what is happening. And sometimes you can have access to that data, and you can do your own analysis live rather than waiting for them to come back. Terry, I just wanted to add this because I thought it was interesting to have.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Emmanuel. So Terry, you've shown us where these programs potentially break in practice. Emmanuel, you kindly shared how we could take this past tier 1 and tier 2, and Dr. Ahmed kindly framed the architecture at the top. So let's close by asking each of you one last question. So if a risk leader watching today does one thing in the next 90 days, what should it be? So Terry, let's start with you.
In the next 90 days, pick one critical supplier and actually map how you depend on them. Not the fantasy version, the real one. Because then you'll learn more about your resilience poster in that singular exercise in a whole year of questionnaires. Resilience by default, my philosophy, it starts by knowing what you can really rely on, not what you hope you can rely on.
Wonderful. Thanks, Terry. Emmanuel.
If I was a risk manager, I would do a 90-day. I think I would do an audit of my system. And as I said, you check. We have breakdown. We know what we are buying. Where is it's coming from? We have the data set. We have the database for this, and also check the contracts we have with customers, with our suppliers. Sorry, so that we can have this audit term and also try to map all this environment to identify, as I said, the components, where the suppliers are and what can go wrong, and that's, I think, that would be my priority.
Fantastic. Dr. Ahmed, what are your thoughts?
Actually, my thought when Terry starts saying select one critical supplier and check reliability, I said, oh my God, you're reading my mind. And then also Emmanuel repeated almost the same thing, but from check that critical supplier from reliability, that's what Terry starts with. And then from visibility and risk management from Emmanuel, I think I would add also from data management and if you choose pick one critical supplier and assess how many places does this supplier exist in how many registers, and you can find them in procurement record, in risk management, in security questionnaire tools, as Emmanuel highlighted multiple times. And I think you mentioned you did 2 yourself, including a US supplier recently, supporting one US entity recently. Then you find them also in sustainability spreadsheets, and again maybe in another contract system. So count them down, then check whether the supplier information is the same in all of those records, and you will be surprised that the problem, how big that problem is, because those records, those different versions won't tie up. And that's I think would be the problem to be addressed in the next 90 days. Map your suppliers, have one source of truth for your suppliers and your business data. That's my recommendation.
Excellent. Good recommendation. Okay, so I just want to wrap up quickly. But I think what really struck me about the last hour is that whatever the practitioner seeks, so whether it's governance, cyber, resilience, supply chain, we keep arriving at the same place. The organizations that really hold up treat these as one problem, one record, one evidence trail. I think they're probably rarer than the rest, but hopefully that dynamic is changing. So I suppose that the regulatory test is the same, whether it's coming from your risk regulator, your sustainability assurer, your cyber team, or audit committee. It's the same question. Show me the value chain and prove it.
It's the holistic approach.
Yeah. Okay, so I just a couple of things, bit of housekeeping. There is a white paper that we'll be sending to everyone that registered and attended the event. So thank you for everyone for attending. You'll get the recording as well. You obviously get an invite to the next session that we have that will probably be after the summer break when everyone's back sort of mid-September. But if you'd like to actually see what it looks like in your own value chain and how Sustained GRC can help with walking you through the processes and some of the suggestions that have been discussed today, then we'd be more than happy to spend 30 minutes or more with you to explain our approach and how we could potentially help you. So with that, I'd like to thank the panelists. So thank you, Terry. You didn't plug your book, which I think you should have done. I think it's a natural plug without even saying anything, right? Emmanuel, that was great. Great insight. Really appreciate that. And Dr. Ahmed, as always, very insightful in the framing of, how we look at it from a vendor's perspective. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, before we conclude, I want to say hard luck to Emmanuel again for the World Cup.
We may have other French people on the call, so you need to be careful.
England, we're going to cheer for England.
Yeah. We certainly will. We
I
certainly will.
support England.
Yeah, well, come on, England, and let's do the business tonight. Keep everyone with a smile on their face here in.
Simon, I'm also happy for you to share the slides I used early in the session today. You can share with the participants.
Yeah, I will do that. So with that, thank you, everyone. Give you 5 minutes back, but I really appreciate everyone's attention, and the panelists have been amazing. So really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.